Greetings and welcome to Flanagan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanagan, and this week my guest is Heather White. She's an author, an advocate, a consultant. She worked on Capitol Hill for Senator Russ Feingold. She served as Education Advocacy Director for the National Wildlife Federation. She worked as a campaign staffer for Al Gore, focusing on women's outreach. She worked as the Executive Director of the Environmental Working Group and the CEO of Yellowstone Forever. In 2021, she founded OneGreenThing. Clearly, we have lots to talk about. Heather, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Ted. It's great to be here.
Thank you again for being here. And where are you today? I always sort of start out with sort of geopositioning.
Oh, what a great question. What a great question. It's not one that I get as much as you would think. I'm based in Bozeman, Montana, where it's snowing. Finally.
It snowing?
Thank goodness we finally have some snow, but it's snowing and beautiful here.
I did a little digging, and I thought you were in Bozeman, but
yeah.
you bounced around in college in DC. And did you grow up in Montana?
No, I'm from East Tennessee originally, which is kind of fun because the East Tennessee vibe and Montana really go hand in hand. A big value on public lands, time outside, and it's been a fun connection for me.
Yeah, and you did go to. I see you went to college in DC.
Yeah, I went to the University of Virginia.
That was law school you did.
University of Virginia, and then went to exactly. Went to the University of Tennessee, go Vols, for law school.
Yeah. Great. Now, what are you focused on this week? What's happening this week in your work life?
Oh, what? Such a great question. This week, I'm focused on really spreading the message about the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. We are working toward a really neat program called the Climate Leadership and Democracy Intensive, really fancy name, named by our Gen Z supporters, our young adults ages 18 to 26, who are wanting to know more about civics education as a way to deal with their mental health challenges with the climate. So we have a green civics program at OneGreenThing. And so this week we're really focused on spreading the word about it and working on having our fourth cohort of students. It's a global cohort of students, usually about 25 to 30 in each class. And so this week we're spreading the word about that.
Oh, great. How great. Well, I was really, I really like the notion of tackling climate anxiety. And then I know that one of your, I guess your most recent book is titled Eco Anxiety. Talk about this and the psychology of it all, and how, yes, there's so many people that are paralyzed. The issues are so big, so discouraging. Gloom and doom is certainly out there, and you've really focused on this, being joyful, uplifting people.
It's such an important issue. Thank you so much, Ted. Climate anxiety, another term is called eco-anxiety.
Yeah.
You may have heard of solastalgia or climate grief, climate doom even. More and more people are starting to connect the dots with the extreme weather events that we're experiencing and their day-to-day life and climate. And as a result, we're seeing a wide range of emotions that people experience due to climate. A lot of young people especially are experiencing anxiety about the future. What will the future look like, especially with all of the rollbacks we're having right now in environment and conservation? And so one of the things I realized after, 25 years of doing this work is that young people feel alone in climate action, including my kids. And it was really a dinner table conversation with my kids that sparked my interest in starting to dive into the connection between mental health and climate. And I realized, and one of the things you asked me about was joy. I realized that we needed to not only give people a language and a way to talk about how they're feeling about the future and how uncertain it is because of climate, but we also needed to help more people see themselves in climate action and have like a sense of agency over this overwhelming issue. So one of the things that I've created is what's called a service superpower assessment. It's a 5-minute online quiz. It's a little bit like Strength Finders or Enneagram or Myers-Briggs. And it asks, who are you in service? And I do that as a way for people, especially young people, to see, okay, here's how I can bring my talents to this overwhelming issue and how I can lean into joy, because these daily habits can help create that culture shift we need for climate solutions to scale.
Oh, that is great. So basically, you're saying take action, figure out what your superpower is, figure out where you can make a contribution, and through that, it's almost like that power that you get, powerful feeling that you get when you volunteer. You just get so much out of it. It's better to give than to receive, I suppose.
Oh,
But
I love that. Yes.
you're
Yes.
really you're turning what you call it climate grief and this sort of this mental paralysis into something very positive. That's not done a whole lot, I don't think.
It's not, and here's, I think, one of the many reasons why, Ted, is
Hmm.
that in the environmental community, we usually start the conversation with do this, not that. We
Hmm.
talk about the what. You need to switch to an EV car, you need to choose this sustainable brand, you need to recycle this, but not plastics, because only 99% of plastics are actually recycled. Instead of asking the most important question when it comes to individual behavior change, and that question is the who. And so I try to start the
Hmm.
conversation with the who. Who are you? Who are you in service? How do you show up for the people you love? What do you want your legacy to be? And how can you get involved? And then when people start thinking about their identity and how they can contribute, then we can move to the what, but it provides that context. And I think the other thing that's really important is sometimes we have this debate in the conservation space of individual action versus systems change or policy change. And we have to have both. If we don't
Yeah.
have individual action, we don't have the culture that allows for the policy changes to be successful. And I think a good example of that is the Inflation Reduction Act, which is such a historic investment in climate solutions. $400 billion. Some estimates say 600 billion if you think about all the tax incentives that were passed in that piece of legislation. But if we don't have people take advantage of those tax credits and in those rebates and opportunities, if we don't have that culture change, then they won't be successful. So we have to have both individual action and policy change.
Like it, like it. I like what you said about the what versus the who, and I'm reminded of the conditional tense, the shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? And I've tried to delete those words from my vocabulary because nobody wants to be told what they should do, right? I mean, you immediately get your back up and you say, "Don't tell me what to do." Uh, so you're really helping people figure out what they are, who they are, what they can do, figure that out, and then that will lead those small incremental actions will lead then to perhaps interest in the broader policy debate as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think, Ted, sometimes, especially young people, kind of mishear me. They
Yeah.
think that, if I say, oh, you skipped the straw today, you have solved the climate crisis. Clearly, that does not solve the climate crisis. Going
No.
for a hike does not change our energy policy. But these daily practices can
Yeah.
help you feel better because you're doing what you can with what you can to either, reconnect with nature or to say to a barista at your local coffee shop or, a server, I don't want that straw. That's yeah, and send that cultural signal. But you're also making sure that people are aware and see other entry points into conservation. So it's both. We have to have both that individual action to decrease your eco
Yeah.
anxiety, exercise that agency, and also create that shift.
There was a woman I met years ago up in Toronto. I think her name was Marjorie Lamb, I think it was, and she wrote a book called 3 minutes a day for the planet,
Oh, neat.
something like that. Well, basically the amount of time that you spend brushing and flossing your teeth. But like you're saying, it's just all these small little actions. And well, one of your books was 60. What was it? 60
60
seconds.
days, 60 days to a greener life. It's kind
Okay.
of like a daily devotional, Ted,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like a meditation book where, every day is a chapter and it's
Mm,
450 words. Sometimes there's a question for reflection or journaling. Other times there's a QR code to learn more about a specific issue or a specific action to take. So the idea is you go at your own pace. And I
mm,
think what we're finding is that people do want this digestible information. They do want to know what can I do, but they
yeah.
also need that larger context of how it relates to who they are, how they show up for the people that they love and for their community, and why it's important to do the thing.
And what you must have lots of you must have gotten lots of feedback over the years. Can you tell us? Can you give us a couple of stories of somebody who was in one of your cohorts or read one of your books and just said, "Yeah, I get this.
Oh,
This is the way I like to step through these things."
Such that's such a great question, Ted. It's one I haven't had before, but I recently in one of our cohorts of young people ages 18 to 26 in our Green Civics program,
Hmm.
there was a young woman from Singapore, and she checked out my first book, One Green Thing, from the library. And that's how she learned about One Green Thing and the programming that we offer to deal with eco anxiety. And so that was one of those moments where it was kind of a pinch me moment. You just never
Hmm.
know the impact that you may have on someone's life. And she's an adventurer and she's very focused on outdoor education and just wanted to connect, globally to like-minded young people and just feel that sense of community. And so that's a really special story. I
Hmm.
think the other fun story, I was giving a talk. I have two more. Giving a talk to a bunch of fifth graders, and this little girl raised her hand and said, "I like to do ballet in the school garden. I think I might be a sage." And a sage is one of the 7 different archetypes that I have
Yeah.
about service. And the sage is focused on the spiritual connection to nature. And they're really helpful because they can help us break through a lot of the political rancor because they're focused on values and connection and intergenerational connection. And I was able to say to that young girl, "Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're a sage," which was fun for her to start seeing like how her role might be different than, a sibling or a member of her family and how she could contribute uniquely. And then finally, Ted, and this isn't necessarily a feel good story, but I do think it's a call to action.
Yeah.
I was giving a talk to, again, 10-year-olds about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this little girl, raised her hand and said, is there a way for us to experience what life would be like if we met these goals? Because I can't even imagine it. And
Hmm.
that was one of those stories that really made me pause and reflect. And it helped me understand that we need to do a better job in the community of painting the portrait of what a healthier, greener, more just future looks like. I think that everyone, including 10-year-olds, understand like the zombie apocalypse, after we've
Yeah.
had the LA fires, the Texas floods. That's just this year, not to mention all the global wildfires and flooding events that we've seen. So people can really understand what the negative view of the future looks like, but we need to do a better job, especially engaging young people in that visual
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Envisioning what this could look
Yes,
like. 'Cause we're so far from that now, aren't we?
we're so far
All,
from it. Yeah.
all we see is the pollution and this and that. And well, one green thing. I mean, we've talked about your books, which sound fantastic. I want to read one now. Um, but your one green thing, you're also a consulting firm. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I help nonprofits with strategic planning and fundraising as well when I'm doing consulting and, of course, do speaking events. And OneGreenThing.org is the nonprofit. And we're just excited to keep sharing this message of not only, engaging people to really listen to the young people in their life about how they feel about the future that we're leaving them, but also provide opportunities for people to get engaged in a meaningful way and understanding that taking action can be joyful as we start talking about that healthier, greener, more just future.
And that's where the joy comes from is realizing that you have a power, you can engage your power, and it just feels good to take steps, right? As opposed to
It
being
does.
a bump on a log and being paralyzed by it all.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about trauma, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm a policy person and a lawyer, as as you mentioned when you were introducing me to your
Yeah,
listeners. But
yeah.
I've done a lot of research on it, and I think in trauma we have several different responses. One is freeze, one is fight, one
Mhm.
is flight, and then there's also the fawn response. But I think a lot of people get stuck in this kind of freeze response when they start understanding the gravity that we're facing with climate and how we're still so far behind. And with the current administration and their I mean, I don't even know a polite way to say it, but they're devastating rollbacks when it comes to climate. Some people are worried about even saying the words climate change now. People are really understandably worried. And so I think it's important to have that context for people to understand those wide range of emotions, but also understanding that taking action does create a sense of joy. And for me, my favorite one is calling 202-224-3121. It is the congressional switchboard. It's programmed in my phone.
Hmm.
I live in Montana, and my representatives don't share a lot of my values, although I will say that they have stood up for public lands, which is fantastic, and I'm really glad they have, so I thank them for that. But I call them at least once a week, and it
Really?
gives me a lot of joy to let them know that, like, how I feel, and I'm doing my part to hold them accountable.
And you're encouraging other people to do the same thing.
Absolutely, absolutely, but what brings me joy may be different from you.
Yeah.
Ted, for example, you might want to I'm sure this podcast gives you a lot of joy, as
Yeah.
I'm imagining you're an influencer, and I don't mean that in, like, the social media context, I mean that in kind of the archetypes that we have at One Green Thing that I've developed, and that is you love connecting people to each other, and you love sharing those stories and helping people see what's possible. And I think that's a really important way to show
Yeah.
up. So we all show up differently.
Really, we really do. And I know that I have some friends that want to get together and have lunch and just talk about how the sky is falling. And I just don't have I don't make the time for that, put it that way.
Yeah.
I'm just at EcoMotion, we have a trademark term called the power of the increment, sort of the inverse of the tragedy of the commons. And it just, yes, I'm with you. Just taking small steps is a powerful thing, and leads
It
to
is.
more and more action. So that's
It
great.
does, and it inspires other people too. So, whether you're carrying your reusable water bottle, although now we have an issue where people have way too many of those,
That's
but,
true.
or you're wearing a thrifted outfit, or you are, sharing an article that you've read, or inviting someone to see a documentary about
Yeah.
public lands or nature. All those things really do make a difference, but just not in the way that we think. I think a lot of times in the environmental movement, one of the personality profiles I call is called the wonk, like a policy wonk. It comes from my DC days.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we just want to talk about all the new technology and the possibilities, and people kind of their eyes glaze over. So I
Yeah.
think it's important that we engage people in different ways, and we forget that the culture shift is so essential. We
Yeah.
forget that that culture is what we're driving with our individual habits. It's not necessarily our individual carbon footprints that we're focused on, although, as you say, it really does make a difference if we all do it. If we all, for example,
Mhm.
eliminated food waste or reduced food waste, we'd have a huge impact globally. But it is also about that culture shift that's so important.
It is. Before we leave the books, Erin Brockovich wrote the foreword to your current book.
Yeah.
And she's one of my environmental heroes. Now, she didn't take on something small. She took on the uranium industry, right, with Kerr McGee. And how did that come about that she became one of your proponents?
Oh, well, Erin is an incredible hero, and it did start small. It started in her backyard.
Mm,
She was working as a paralegal at a law
yeah,
firm. The
yeah,
film Erin Brockovich, of course, is amazing, and if any of your listeners haven't seen it, you should watch it. Julia Roberts deserved the Oscar for Erin because that definitely is her personality. And then she actually says that her dyslexia was her superpower because she was able to start looking at this water contamination data and could kind of read it backwards or see it backwards the way her mind works. She was able to
mm,
look at the data in a very different and unique way and realize that there was a real challenge with PG&E and contamination of hexavalent chromium in the water in Hinckley, California, and there were significant numbers of different health clusters and cancer clusters in that community.
yeah,
So it started small and then grew really big. And I think the way that I worked with her and I got to know her is that we worked together in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which happens to have one of the largest male breast cancer clusters in the
mm,
world. And all of the connections between the people in this male breast cancer cluster is that they all spent time on Camp Lejeune. They are either veterans or children of veterans
Yeah.
or contractors at the DoD. And so we were doing work to try to get them to receive medical monitoring. So we just really hit it off, and she's been a dear friend, and
Oh,
it's
great.
been a complete inspiration, and highly recommend following her. And I'm just honored that she is not only on the board of One Green
Yeah.
Thing, but also did the forward for the books.
How great. How great. Now you did a TEDx talk on global plastic crisis.
Did.
And
I
I
did.
want to talk about that for a minute. I was just looking at the news this morning, and Bloomberg Green Daily just came out with an article about global plastics and how by 2040 we're going to be producing twice as much. And plastics are clogging the oceans and the waterways, and microplastics are into our bodies. And I mean, it seems like an incredibly discouraging topic. How did you work? How did you address that TEDx talk?
Oh, I'm so excited that you asked this, Ted, because it's supposed to launch in January 2026, the talk, or maybe early February.
Oh, okay.
This is like just hearing your recap of this article
Hmm.
induces eco anxiety to most people, right?
Yeah. Oh,
We have
yeah. Oh, yeah.
plastics in our brain, in our heart, in our blood, microplastics, they're
Well,
everywhere.
and the greenhouse
So
gas emissions related to plastic production, they say in the article, by 2040 would be equivalent to like the third largest greenhouse emitting country in the world. I mean, this is a massive issue, right?
it's a massive issue. So, a couple things. One, I want to remind people that the United Nations is considering a treaty to deal
Hmm.
with global plastic pollution. And that only happened because of individuals who said, I'm skipping the straw. I'm worried about plastic pollution on the beaches where I live or vacation. I'm worried about Cancer Alley because plastics, of course, is fossil fuels and derived from fossil fuels.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about these impacts. So the individual actions really did make a global impact, but we are running out of time. We need to keep making sure that people are putting as much pressure on consumers as possible. Excuse me, consumers are putting as much pressure on as possible on companies, on the fossil fuel companies, and on companies that use plastics to look for other alternatives. There's some amazing new technologies out there, everything from like mushroom packaging that biodegrades to you name it. So we have a
Yeah.
lot of potential. But as far as your question about the talk was really different because most of the talks, and I highly recommend seeing them when they go live, were about these new technologies. They were about the what. They were about the solutions. And my
Hmm.
talk, Ted, was about our anxiety as a message from our future selves. So I
Hmm.
talked about time travel because it's one of my deep passions. I think about time and deep time and geologic time all the time. I really do. It's so fun. But I talked about this idea that our anxiety that we're feeling about the future is our future selves not just giving us a warning, but telling us that we need to change the conversation to what's possible because we are the architects of the future. It doesn't just happen to us. We get to decide what happens next. And so it was really tuning into your future self, having that conversation and starting to look at this issue more than a technical issue, although it is a technical issue, but more of a crisis of imagination and creativity. And so I talk about that. I'm
Hmm.
excited to
Hmm.
share it with you all when it goes live.
And your advice to a consumer would be what in relation to plastics? I mean, we've
Oh,
mentioned
great
straws
question.
a
Yeah,
few times, but
absolutely. Great question. I'm on the Plastic Pollution Coalition board, so I highly recommend going to
hmm,
plasticpollutioncoalition.org. They have all kinds of great tips. The first thing is try to refuse single-use plastic when you can. Do
yeah,
everything, from your local restaurant. If you're doing takeout, ask them to push for compostable materials. Don't have plastic if you can, in your kitchen instead of there's all kinds of great alternatives to saran wrap. You don't need saran wrap or Ziploc bags. There's all kinds of reusable bags there when it
yeah,
comes to consumers. Call your brands and ask them like, why is there so much plastic packaging? Tell
yeah.
them that you don't want it. And really look for sustainable brands that are out there. And the Plastic Pollution Coalition has a great resource of brands and businesses that they're working with who've made commitments to either eliminate single-use plastic or promote different alternatives that are compostable like paper. And then I would also say we do a lot, holidays are coming up and just this
Yeah, yeah,
idea, Ted, that, you use real stuff. use real stuff. A lot of times people use paper plates and plastic for these
Yep.
holiday parties because they're worried about cleanup. Make a
Yeah.
plan for your kitchen cleanup and make it intergenerational. Put the kids to work, but you wouldn't be surprised, like, the fun conversations people can have as they're cleaning the kitchen, after a party, and you can make it really fun using real stuff.
And I just was at a Thanksgiving. It was delightful, wonderful meal, and all plastic plates and plastic
Yeah.
forks. And I was like, gosh, I wish I had just volunteered to do the cleanup because I
Right.
actually like doing dishes. It's very
I
rewarding.
love it. I
Um,
love doing the dishes, and,
and
oh,
it's so much nicer eating on
so
China
much
with,
nicer. It is, and many of us have it, and, so we can use it, and one of the things I always
yeah,
joke about is, like, if you have a funky candy dish that your great aunt gave you, or some wild things like candlesticks you never used, just bring them. Bring out the
yeah.
good
Think
stuff.
about it.
Use the real stuff for sure.
The Bloomberg article, which is not, it is gloom and doom today, but it ends up sort of asking about what would the milkman of the past that brought your glass milk jugs and then took away the empty ones for reuse. It was just, what would that milkman think today going into these markets and seeing everything is just single use milk cartons, jugs for orange juice, and it's just extensive. I wanted to make, we only have a few more minutes, but I wanted to hit on a few things. You were you were at the environmental working group for a number of years, and you doubled the revenues for the organization, which is fantastic. And in a nutshell, what does EWG do, and what was your charge when you were there? What were you pushing for it to do?
Oh, EWG is just a terrific nonprofit focused on environmental health. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I loved about my time there is that it was so interdisciplinary. There were computer programmers, data specialists, chemists, policy people, brilliant writers, all getting together to really trying to create a way for people to understand big data sets
Hmm.
and the most recent science when it comes to toxic chemicals and their connection to our health. One of the fun things that they operate is a farm subsidy database and talk about farm policy. So you can type up in your zip code who's receiving farm subsidies. Also, at one point, we mapped nuclear waste transportation routes. It was
Hmm.
just a really fun organization that looks at these big sets of data. You can also look and see, like, forever chemicals if they're in your drinking water. There's also a great tap water atlas.
Hmm.
Type in your zip code and see what your
Hmm.
drinking water utility says is in your backyard. So what I did, I was a general counsel and then executive director of EWG. I worked there for about 9 years, and my focus was really trying to make it, more of a daily resource for people on how to live a greener life. To take all of these wonderful, nerdy research that was very accessible, but make it part of kind of a daily touch base to learn more about what's in your backyard. So that's one of the great privileges I had as being executive director there. And what's fun is that obviously I'm in a very different space now, talking about the psychology of climate
Yeah.
and service leadership in climate. But I do believe, like, this idea of a daily practice of sustainability is
Hmm.
really important for us, because I call it the one green thing. Whether
Yeah.
it's the walk in nature, whether it's listening to this podcast, whether it's watching a documentary, whether it's calling your member of Congress, coming
Yeah.
up with your cleanup plan for the holidays so you don't use, plastic for your celebrations. I
Yeah.
think that it can provide a lot of joy in our lives.
That is great. Last couple questions. You've had lots of media coverage. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're clearly a strong and appealing spokesperson on
Thank
environmental
you.
issues. Good Morning America, CBS, PBS, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post. What were sort of the highlights when you look back in your career? And you're over it, obviously, but
Oh,
so far, what's the highlight been in terms of working with the media?
I think there's so many.
Yeah.
Obviously going to 30 Rock is really fun, right? So
Okay.
being at 30 Rock with NBC News was just a ball, just like so much fun. And then, of
Mm.
course, Good Morning America. There's nothing like the thrill of Good Morning America and and being part of that. So I like that, I like just the energy from that. But I think what I've appreciated so much is, despite the incredible onslaught that we have of negative media in our lived experience right now, of how bad it is for people who care and have
Mhm.
compassion for community and the planet. These are really tough times, that there are still a lot of reporters who are very interested in the connection between our mental health and nature and climate action. And so I think that's what I've appreciated the most. But I
Yeah.
do have to say that it always gives me a thrill going to 30 Rock.
No, I can imagine. Well,
Yeah.
you obviously you've maintained optimism in your own life. Last question: how do you stay balanced? How do you maintain a positive work-life balance?
That's a great one. Let's see. The first thing I try to do is I try to get outside every day, which, as you can imagine, in Montana is challenging sometimes when it's 40 below. But I
Yeah.
do, like, even 5 minutes outside. All of the peer-reviewed
Mm,
scientific research says it can lower your blood pressure, lower cortisol spikes, increase overall sense of well-being. So I do try to do that at least every day. One of my favorite writers is Anne Lamott, and she has a great quote that says, "Go outside, look up, secret to life." And so that's one of my favorite
great,
one green things. So that helps me
great.
stay grounded for sure.
Heather, thanks so much for being on the podcast. More so, thank you for all you're doing. I love your philosophy, the action you're taking, getting people into service, being joyful about taking action instead of succumbing to gloom and doom. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Ted. I appreciate it.
That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanagan's Ecologic. We'll see you next time.